I'd like to call the meeting of the Planning Commission agenda, or the Planning Commission meeting of February 26, 2018 to order at 7:30. If you'll please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right.
Can I take attendance?
Yes, please.
Mark Kahn.
Yeah.
Darrell Lewandowski.
Yes.
DJ McLaughlin.
Yep.
Pam Willow.
Yes.
Bruce Reed. Robert Rizzo.
Here.
And Daniel Begary.
Present.
Thank you. All present and counting for. Full health.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. Number 4, approval of the agenda.
I make a motion to approve the agenda for February 26, 2018 as submitted.
I'll second it.
All those in favor of approving the agenda as submitted, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Agenda passes. Number 5, public comments.
Seriously? Probably read,
Yeah.
consider it all.
Pam.
Yeah. Okay. We are reviewing the part 6 of the agriculture and the master plan, and our resident regular farmer has ditched us tonight. But she was kind enough to send a letter, and so I'm going to read that out loud for the record, because this, I'm sure, would be her comment. Pam, I am unable to attend tonight's meeting since I chair a meeting the last Monday of each month and have yet to figure out a way to be in 2 places at once. I just wanted to comment that I think the proposed language for the agricultural and land preservation is a step in the right direction. For the township to be truly committed to this future, a priority should be placed on a reasonable budget for the purchase of development rights and/or the land itself. A landowner seeking to enroll in a program such as Ann Arbor's Greenbelt will receive a higher score if there are additional partners in the preservation process. The shared driveway change also assist should a large landowner need to raise capital, allowing him or her to sell a much smaller portion of the land for the necessary funds. Several places in the proposed language the township is going to support or promote agricultural and land preservation. I would like to hear a discussion of specifically what steps and actions are being proposed to do this. If that discussion takes place tonight, I will listen to it via video. These steps need to be more than just words. They need to be items on which the Planning Commission or Township Board can act, as they did with the beautification of the hamlet. Thank you for taking your time to review this. Linda Hamilton. Okay. So we'll just put Linda's letter. Okay, new business items? None. Oops, sorry, that was connected there. Master plan updates, part 5, 6, and 11 is discussion.
12.
Oh.
12. These are my old glasses. I've lost my new ones. I'm sorry. Just stay on me. Just keep correcting me. I'm used to it. Okay. Master plan updates, part 5, 6, and 12, discussion. I have a problem with this font, apparently. Okay. So, does anybody have a preference? Well, first, Paul, could you review why we are reviewing these?
Sure.
Again.
Yes. Well, thank you. I did include a memo with the updates that should have been in your packet. Essentially, we're looking at trying to wrap this thing up. We've spent quite a bit of time looking at a couple of parts of the master plan, specifically the hamlet and the USD. I was kind of under the impression that you had been working through part by part because I had a copy from your previous planning consultant of these different sections of the plan that had some edits. So I don't know to what extent you've actually looked at these, but I was directed by the Planning Commission to kind of go through and look at these other parts and make sure that they were consistent with the work that we have done recently with the USD and the hamlet sections, and make sure that it was all kind of up to date and consistent with our current thinking, current policy direction, et cetera. So I started going through these sections. I started going through the entire master plan, and it looks like the last updates were done back in February of 2016 or March of 2016. So I don't know to what extent you've all looked at those, but I did go through and I made some minor changes in Part 5 and Part 6. Those were existing chapters. One was previously called the physiographic features. I think it makes more sense to call them natural features because I don't know that everybody would look at physiographic features and really have a good understanding of what that meant. But essentially that talks about wetlands, woodlands, their importance, how steps we can take to try to maintain and preserve those things based on their ability to preserve water quality, natural aesthetics, as well as provide habitat for animals and that kind of thing, air quality, etc. So there were really minor changes that I made to that. The agricultural chapter talks about the importance of farming in the community in terms of the rural economy, agricultural economy, and how that's important to the township. And again, it's a shorter chapter. I didn't make too many changes. There were already some changes there, so I kind of looked through those. Some of them actually, there were some things that were stricken through that I reversed the strike-throughs. So if you see something in there that you had previously discussed, and I'm not privy to the reason why it was stricken through, obviously I want to hear that from you. So if some of this stuff is repeat, I apologize. I'm coming up to speed on these things as well. And then in light of some of the activity and initiatives that the Planning Commission and the Township has undertaken in terms of land preservation, and some of the work that I'd done with the Land Preservation Board earlier last year, we talked about how it would be important to put some pieces into the master plan that support that activity and really provide a framework for that activity. So there's policy direction, because I think there's been some concern in the past that while there is criteria for establishing a piece of land that the Preservation Board might go after, if you will, for preservation, it would add more teeth to it, a little more backing, so that everybody in the township could say, oh, yeah, this is consistent with the policy direction that comes from the master plan. So I put this Part 12 together, land preservation. It really draws on both of those other chapters. That's why I've included those as well in this discussion tonight, both the natural features as well as the agricultural land. So I set this chapter up basically discussing the importance, not just for the character and the aesthetic quality, those kind of things, but the other reasons why they're important. Talked a little bit about preservation criteria. I would encourage you to look at that. It's on page, well, that actually works, 2 of 2, but all of them say 2 of something. But it's on the second page of that, and I apologize. Bruce brought to my attention that the page numbering is incorrect on this draft here, so I'll clean that up. But I encourage you to look at that if you have done so. I'd take comments this evening. If you want to take some time to look at it and provide comments in the coming days or weeks, that would be helpful too. But basically, the criteria that we develop would be risk of development, location along entry corridors, total acreage of an individual parcel, proximity to other preservation lands, and then recreation opportunities. And so all of those are kind of some high-level criteria that would help a particular piece of property rise to the top as something that might be one that we want to look at in more detail. Then, because a picture tells 1,000 words, we took this and created a target preservation map, which is included in the chapter, and I've also put larger copies on your table so they're a little bit easier to read. But ultimately, we tried to highlight, and this is based on a number of maps that exist in the master plan already, ones that look at natural features, ones that look at prime farmland, and then also, we had done a session some months ago where Commissioner Reeves actually put together a colored map kind of showing some of the development potential in some of those areas that were already developed. So in some ways, this is kind of the inverse of that map in that we didn't highlight the areas that have already been developed. We didn't highlight the areas that probably have lower development potential because they're existing wetlands or low potential for development because of types of soils, etc. But instead highlighted those areas that are in proximity to existing open space, other preservation lands, large tracts of land, basically those criteria that I just kind of quickly went through. And then finally, as with all of the chapters in this master plan, the chapter ends with a list of strategies. And those are the direction and the tools that we would use in terms of implementation as we move forward in the coming months, coming years after this plan is adopted to enact the policies that we've developed here. So I would answer any questions that you have, but I would encourage you to kind of discuss the findings, discuss the policies, and especially look at this map and see if there are areas that you know of that are inappropriate to include as target preservation areas, or indicate areas that might be appropriate to also include.
Paul, I had a couple questions for you.
Yep.
I was reading this part 5, and I got 3 questions actually. Wondering why, if you know, if the Johnson drain, if the water quality is checked quite often, it says, but not the other Fleming drain and Wagner drain and those other rivers. Yeah, I was wondering why those weren't checked. And then I was also wondering, what is the difference between a pond and a wetland? Is the wetland only full of water certain times of the year, or is a pond determined by its depth? I kind of wanted a clarification on that. And then the only other thing I was wondering, how does that deed restriction work? Could you give me some more information on that? Is that going to be something that's the title companies involved in, or real estate agents, or how is all that deed restriction for land preservation?
Okay. So the water quality question.
Is this all in number 5?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to check on the water quality question. That's a piece that was already in here, so I don't know why the Johnson Creek would be checked more often than others. I think it's a larger flow of water through that one. That would be a speculation, but I'll check more specifically. A wetland versus a pond. A wetland has very specific defined criteria, and you're right. Oftentimes it's not wet throughout the year. The 3 main criteria for wetland are hydric soils. So the soils that are in the area have certain qualities that a soil expert or a wetland expert would be able to determine. Hydrophytic plants, so the types of plants that grow in there only grow in wetland areas. And then lastly is inundation for a certain amount of time during the year. So if it's only inundated in the spring months, if you will, then it wouldn't qualify as a pond per se, but likely it could be a wetland. So those 3 criteria are what are looked at when a wetland delineation is being done.
Are ponds protected as wetlands are, or?
Ponds are protected by DEQ in a similar fashion, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Wetlands get a little more attention because they're not as obvious.
Maybe more broader spans too. Usually wouldn't it be a wetland?
Yeah, so open water are typically considered waters of the state if they meet certain criteria. So rivers, streams, and ponds are protected by the DEQ as well as waters of the state. And then the wetlands get a little more attention because they are typically often more threatened, because developers look at them and say, well, that's just a swamp area, or that's, you know, something that needs to be filled in, and you know, we in this discussion recognize the benefit for water quality, for, you know, water storage, for flooding issues, as well as purification for groundwater recharge, etc. And then your last question was deed restrictions. So a deed restriction would be something that would be placed on the land. It would be recorded at the county level, and the deed restriction would talk about what could or could not happen in terms of land use, building, etc.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Yeah.
Can we get some new maps
New maps?
placed in some of these? I think
Yes.
updated maps.
I can certainly get some updated maps in there. We were kind of focused on this new map, because I think this one is the one that took the most, you know, manipulation or changes. The other maps are going to be reproductions of existing layers that the county maintains, but we can certainly get those cleaned up.
Yeah, some of these just look so archaic and irrelevant. I mean, I know they are relevant, but they're difficult to read.
We can do that.
So the maps we have in here for woodlands and wetlands and whatnot are maintained by the county, so that overlay is adjusted.
That's correct. Yeah.
And would the same be true for some of the farm, in the next section, some of that farmland and the data seem to be outdated, I guess. And it's just relevant to elections. So when you take this to the board, it needs to be updated. So I don't think it's pertinent for discussion tonight, but percent it should be updated.
I can't promise that the county layers have been updated.
But to the best of what we have available.
Yeah, but we can certainly do what we can and make them look consistent with the new maps that we're producing at a minimum.
Any other questions or comments on part 5?
I have a quick question.
Okay.
Just close to the end where it was open space and development utilization, and it says at least 50% of a PUD or cluster development should be set aside as permanently protected open space. We do have that with the one at Goffredson, I mean, the show stack one, I hope.
So ultimately, the master plan is policy direction. It's not legislation. So if it's protected in that way, it would have to be in the zoning ordinance, and I'll have to look to see what the specific details are in the zoning ordinance. But if there are things that we're providing direction on in the master plan, then the next step would be, after this is adopted, to look at the zoning ordinance and say, okay, is the zoning ordinance consistent with the direction that we provide in the master plan? So this is really where you want to make sure that what we're saying is what we want to have happen, because this is going to give us the direction for the work that we do in the coming months or years.
Which was my comments, just going back to making sure that the ordinances dovetail with the master plan and that our updates do what we say we're supposed to be doing in here.
Yeah.
And protect us for certain things, particularly the farm areas you mentioned about something as simple as a wedding barn, but with that come liabilities and everything else, and neighbors and all that stuff that need to be considered. So your ordinances and zoning and codes and all that have to be supportive of not being intrusive on other people and making sure it's something that makes sense for the area.
If you see language that maybe is softer than you'd like it to be, if there's more that you'd like to add to something like that. So if in the strategy section we say agricultural tourism is a helpful way to preserve agricultural land, or helps to add financial incentives to a farmer to maintain their ag land, period. And you think that it should also say, however, in developing the regulations for this, the township must be careful to ensure to protect the enjoyment and privacy, etc., of the neighbors, then we should say that here. I think it does, but
Yeah,
specifically.
But to your point, I definitely like, is in the master plan, it gives us some of the stuff, but I think it gives us also the responsibility to do some homework and invite the appropriate parties as we get into the ordinances for the farm and whatnot, that we bring all the parties to the table, neighbors as well as farmers themselves, and say, hey, we've got this language, now what do we need to do to back it? It is obviously stated in the letter to the planning commission, what are we going to do to back it up with the ordinances and whatnot. And again, I think there's some more progressive opportunities out there, or mindsets out there for developing properties today that offer open areas and open planning, but still give landowners the opportunity to develop their properties. So we might need to be a little more progressive on some of that, so that we don't have a tendency to want to chop up some of the nicer open spaces and woodlands and wetlands just to get that density of so many houses per 2 acre, one house per 2 acres or whatever. So that we may want to be able to look at some of the opportunities to do developments that are still maintain the same density or less, but yet leaving us larger open spaces instead of just chopping things up into squares and rectangles.
Yeah. Okay. And like I said, I think that many of the things that you mentioned are indicated in this.
I've read actually a lot of that in there. So my point is we got to back it up with the how-tos.
And you're right. So the real work then comes after this is done. I know that it feels like we've been putting a lot of work into this, but the heavy lifting comes then when you start looking at the zoning ordinance and having to figure out then the details, because these are a lot of great ideas, but then it's always kind of the devil in the details, if you will. And if there are some things that you want to make sure are placed in here, as far as very particular directions, I mean, we try not to get too particular. We want this to be a good policy document that gives us backing to do the work that we need to do. But if there's some specifics, I certainly would accept, line edits if you have any, if you see things that you want to add to this, or additional strategies or anything like that. And you don't have to tell me about them all now, but if you feel like sending an email or something like that, we can look at those and add those as well.
With the PUD development, it's pretty much incorporated in the structure of a PUD development that you cluster the homes and yet the surrounding area is preserved, so that the number of units per acre stays pretty consistent with the policies of the township. I know with Shostak we're involved in the approval process as they go with their site plan and whatnot, that we make sure all of those items are taken care of, such as tree mitigation and all of those things like that. That we develop paths and open areas and all that type of thing, so I would think with a PUD development, you're pretty much protected on it with the process and the parameters of a PUD development, are we not?
Yeah, so that's the intent of the PUD, is that you maintain underlying zoning density, but it allows for some flexibility so that you can use some more protection of other items. And then there's a lot of rules in the zoning ordinance currently, but certainly we'll want to evaluate those rules in the zoning ordinance after we're finished with this and make sure that there aren't changes that are necessary.
And you feel that the language that we have here is pretty consistent in protecting us with a development such as a Shostak development, that our language is in line with that type of development and the township standards for that type of development?
I think so. I mean,
Okay,
I think
that would be my concern, because that's where our area, you know, and I think that was one of our intents, was to make sure that we had the master plan and zoning that would protect the township with those type of developments.
Yeah, I mean, by and large, the future land use plan for most of the township calls for AR, agricultural residential. And it's talked about time and time again throughout the master plan that any density of development is supposed to be focused in the utility service district, or excuse me, the urban service district or the hamlet.
You were talking about tributaries a little while ago, and the different tributaries. Don't most of the tributaries, though, contribute to the Johnson Creek, and then Johnson Creek goes further east? And, you know, it has a lot to do with the quality of our water, and the quality of the water to surrounding communities. Those tributaries, from what I understand, land preservation contribute to the Johnson Creek. That's the main artery that goes through to the Rouge River.
Well, we have basically two,
Yeah, it goes to the
we do the Huron, our township has Huron watershed and Rouge River watershed, so we're
Right.
kind of split between the two watersheds. And of course, that's where we're gonna go for some of our help in writing some of the stuff and watching, because each one of those watersheds have people that are monitoring this stuff and giving us feedback and information and whatnot, but we have two major rivers to get help from.
And east of Ann Arbor, I think Salem Township contains most of that water supply that's going east. I think we have a big impact on the quality of water.
In reading this documentation, there was a lot of groundwater recharge areas within our township,
Right.
and it does take care of that, but particularly our township being almost 100% well today, and then after the PUD, almost 100% well. It's important to us that we really drill down on this stuff, because it's our future.
Sure.
It's, without drinking water,
True.
So I may add a criteria then for the target areas to indicate something that has to do with, contains important water features such as wetlands, groundwater recharge areas, or county drains. There's another important criteria. Bruce, I know we had talked about something like a riparian overlay or buffer. In a conversation that you and I had, we're still working on getting a better streams, rivers, and drains layer. This map is incomplete, but we will be working on that. And the intent would be to indicate the need for a substantial buffer along all streams, rivers.
in the language here was, part of the language was stating that we needed to take an inventory of our wetlands and our woodlands and whatever, and incorporate that, so it actually left us some homework here, to future homework, to literally do that through either policy assignments for land preservation, or through us here to come up with that inventory, and then do the appropriate ordinances and overlays to support protecting groundwater recharge areas and really critical wildlife areas for woodlands and the wetlands and all that stuff. So I'm not that educated on those areas, but I know we have resources available to us that can point these things out to us, which are most critical and down to secondary or less necessary to worry about. But we certainly want to capture our most critical groundwater recharge areas, wetland areas, woodland areas, and do some sort of an overlay and an ordinance to support, even if we have to go denser on the perimeter or peripheral of that, but overall, not exceeding our density, but keeping the development off of those areas that we need to have for our
land preservation butting up to those areas is desirable, if we were able to get people to preserve their properties around those critical areas.
So then again, I would also kind of encourage you to look at those strategies. They're at the end of each of these chapters, and think about, are these strategies the appropriate strategies that we want to use to try to get these goals? Are there things that you see that you don't think are appropriate for the community? Or are there other items that you would like to add or strengthen the tone of? And if you want to spend time, some more time looking at these things, obviously, like I said, I can take comments by email anytime as we continue to round this document out. I'm sorry? Yeah.
On all sections, 5, 6, 1, 12.
Yep.
Can we just work on 5 right now?
5 is
So that we
fine.
can knock that out.
Page 5, very top. And that obviously it was in the previous one, so you can all blame me anyway. Very top paragraph, unfortunately, building practices have often turned water into pollution in areas of development where protected water quality has not been of prime importance. Runoff is usually too warm for, I'm assuming too warm to support oxygen levels for, fish, or, so I'm just,
Yeah, so that's protecting the cool rivers and streams is important for aquatic life.
Okay, so maybe we put some detail in there, just, what the reason was behind it.
That's because of the impervious surfaces in the developments.
Yeah.
Well, we just have to make a law, we're not allowed to have that much clay in Salem. We're okay.
It's our protector, I thought.
Let's make a law. Your flood came next week. Does anyone know when the last time we reached that elevation of water that we had? That would be good. I think that was our 100-year. That was incredible.
It ran 24/7. It isn't now.
I'm trying to understand why the water, we didn't feel like we had that much rain or that much snow. We have that heavy of a water table rise that had the kind of problems we had.
The ground is still frozen.
Yeah, we had a lot of frost.
Ground is still.
Okay. Are we done with number 5?
So,
Should we move on? I was wondering if maybe we should move on to part 12, since that'll be kind of a quick, easy one. Hopefully.
I apologize. Can I go back on 5 for just a
Sure.
second? You got a map for drains and streams, which was, I think, part of the floodplain.
Number 9.
Number 9, correct,
Yep.
map number 9. And I know that it was just, it's existing. Is there a better one that actually has shows some of the actual floodplain areas? I mean,
Again, that's the layer that we're trying to find.
yeah, if you find it, that one is probably the least helpful map in the whole group so far.
That's
color.
color.
Yeah. I apologize.
find an angle. It's down to 6, so we can just go down from there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Part 12,
It's only
land
6 miles by
preservation.
6 miles. The green on that map on page 2-3 is just residential, more residentially developed
Yes.
That seems pretty consistent with that. Do we want to even call that out? Just say, residentially developed, residential application.
So that's actually a aerial view. It's kind of blank space. And I think that the quality of that map in the document is poor. If you look at the one that you have, that I handed out at the desk, you can see that.
What, would it make any sense to carve out and highlight the PUD area?
Call me the engineer. When you're looking at an entire chart like this, every color or every nomenclature should be defined what it is. I mean, I know it's more residential. I don't know. Someone's going to say, what is the green? You know, it's kind of like, just put me.
Label everything.
Yeah.
I mean, some of these properties have, I mean, you can color them a couple different ways depending on how you want to read the map here,
Right.
but I think as a general.
Correct.
Go ahead.
As a general overlay here, I mean, it's basically showing the residential versus some of the more open space properties that we probably need to drill down a little farther and then look at. Back in the strategy section, what do we want to look at more in depth as properties that, so maybe we can actually color it even further in land preservation or some other overlays.
There are a lot of blues on this map.
Yes, but if you look at them, a lot of them are the old school farms right now. The farm land, and not necessarily
But we
always
just
farm.
didn't hear the different blues. They're not.
Yeah, we got the stream, yeah, the shades of blue, which is a lot of our maps have the same problem of, there's 3 shades of yellow instead of, pink, yellow, and orange, there's 3 shades of yellow on the map, like, okay, which shade of yellow
Yeah,
is this?
Yeah.
And Bruce, you asked about carving out the USD area.
I was wondering if it would make any sense to just consistently show that as a separate area on a map, because it is a separate area that relates to, I mean, you can't preserve property in the USD, but, and there is some that's already,
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
And Paul, can I ask a question? Even if we go forward with this and we update maps, it doesn't require us to rewrite the master plan to insert an updated map, I would assume. Updated maps become available. I mean, that may require some sort of a motion or something like that, but we hope we can insert, because when the maps get updated, sometimes in the same, not in the same cycle that we're actually meeting and updating our master plan.
So technically, the state statute calls for a review, at least a review or an update every 5 years. So if we get the most up-to-date maps into this document by the time we're finished with this, the master plan becomes adopted, any changes that you make to that master plan, you would have to send out a notice of intent to plan, you would have to send out, because those maps may have implications, policy implications that could change things for owners, property owners, et cetera. So technically, yes, you would have to go through that process to make changes.
Okay, I understand. I just thought as it being this is a document of vision that it's new information where hopefully we answer it in there would require then the whole process over again. Which then brings up another question, which is off subject, but for my educational purposes, the clock started 4 years ago for the rewrite. When does it start again? When this one is approved, or 4 or 5 years from when the clock started the last time?
When you adopt it.
So.
If it's adopted, we'll start again. No.
Okay, so that's when the clock starts again. And are we, under any pressure to get this done in a certain time
Yes.
frame.
Yes.
And if we exceeded that, or I feel we have, but obviously we're here, but are we under any penalty for anybody for not having this done yet?
It is not uncommon for people to take quite a long time to do these things. Ideally, once you have this thing updated and modernized, and you're on the schedule of the 5-year, you should be able to do it more quickly the next time. So
Yeah.
there's not a master plan police that's out there kind of blowing the whistle on anybody.
Oh, yes, there probably is in Salem.
Well,
We got a lot of police in Salem.
yeah.
Okay, so we're under obligation to break this thing done within reason of doing it right.
I think
I mean,
that
I
my
think the biggest
expectation
pressure-
is, and what I've communicated to Paul, is this has been dragging on forever with show stack in the middle of all that. We are gonna get this done, we need to finish it, but we're not gonna finish it at the expense of finishing it in May with a bunch of outdated maps, where if we were just to maybe finish it, you know, at the end of June or something and have it done right.
Right, but we, in the process here, it has to go to the board, I assume, and then there's a public hearing. Can you help me out and run
The
through
timeframe
the
of that?
processes, all the processes?
Yeah,
that
so
At
just
some
to,
point, we have to have the right maps in there, and what is that?
so, I would suggest that the biggest pressure should be from ourselves. As you say, you want to get it done because you need to have it in place. The process would be, once you have a document that you feel is good to go, you would make a motion to recommend to the board to ask them to release the plan for the public review and comment period. So there's a 63-day mandatory public comment period. After such time, we would hold a public hearing. I believe the board has exerted their right to have the final adoption of this. So at that public hearing, you would take any comments that came during the public hearing and any comments that came in during the review period. You may make some changes that time if you feel that they're appropriate. At that point, you would adopt the plan and make a recommendation to the board to also adopt the plan. And then the board would either adopt it, or if they don't like it, they would kick it back down to the planning commission and say, no, we want you to make these changes.
Great, thank you.
So the biggest chunk of time in that would be that mandatory 63-day review.
So there was plenty of opportunity for the residents of the township to weigh in on that, and obviously we'll have notification out there and whatnot, so.
Yep.
Then they get a chance to weigh in, it goes back to the board, and then the board can choose to accept the adjustments. And
Correct.
Great. Thank you.
There's a fine you have to pay because you brought it up. Great. Okay, now we're on 12.
You're all ready to move to?
Move to it.
Okay. Who's first, TJ, you have a question?
I don't have any questions in this section. I think it's clear, there's strategies, I think we already are doing some of them, and I think things are in place for the others.
My question of you should be, we have the Land Preservation Conservation Committee review this and get their input for some feedback, since that's their baby.
I think that would be great.
That would have been my suggestion, is that could we have the opportunity to let
The map,
everybody weigh in on that at the land preservation side, and see if we missed anything, or just, you know, second set of eyes is always great.
When is your next,
That will come after this, because we're off schedule because of the holiday, this meeting. But normally, don't we meet prior to land preservation, I think?
Next
We meet on a
month,
Tuesday,
yeah.
we meet on a Monday.
Right.
So it's gonna be two of these meetings before you'll be able to get back with what the expression is from the Land Preservation Commission.
It would be
So-
acceptable to do it via email.
I think that would be ideal, just to email the members and get feedback, and probably through Sue Bajan, who's the chair.
And maybe invite her to the next planning commission meeting when she's there.
Yes. Very good.
Thank you.
I should talk to her about that today. She was in office.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I can make any changes that we've discussed tonight and get you a fresh copy to send out. We request for comments.
Okay, let's see then. Anything else?
For 12.
We're good?
Looks pretty good.
Okay, 12 is check. 6.
Well, on the part 6, I just had a couple of questions. The, relates to the hobby farming. So I'm assuming that the 2-acre minimum lot size is acceptable to put the hobby farm on?
The current zoning ordinance allows for growing gardens and things of that nature. The AR district allows for agriculture, so presumably yes.
Okay, because this is, greenhouse operations, and they're even talking about roadside stands. So that can be done by reading or for the hobby farms.
Yeah, so once you get into a situation where you're doing any kind of like agritourism or anything like that, obviously the ordinance requires you to go through the conditional use permit process. But if you're just doing a hobby farm where you're not inviting people in, if you're doing a weed pick operation though, and you're bringing in the public, then you throw yourself into a different situation.
Now, if you have a roadside stand though, then you have to go in front of, you've got to have a site plan and go in front of the planning commission.
I believe there is a requirement in the ordinance.
These on agricultural residential.
I think that, I can't remember off the top of my head if it's administrative approval, but I know there's.
That's like, I wouldn't doubt if it's probably some sort of right to farm, but as far as I understand that stuff, anything any kid can grow, but if it's great, do a roadside stand, to me it's 50 cents.
And I guess it would depend too if it's in the right of way with the county.
So, we zoned agricultural,
Really?
agricultural residential, just like, you want to permit for mowing, or get a pond, or anything like that. We zoned
The lemonade
agricultural.
stand for your kids, you don't have to pull it from it?
Yeah, but most of the properties here are ag residential, right? The dual zone.
Same.
So it is permitted, but it's permitted in the RC, AR, ER, state residential, local commercial, and general commercial with criteria from section 40.104. So I think it's an administrative approval, but they do have to meet the requirements of farming operations from this section of ordinance.
One of my questions is, and when looking at all these things in the agritourism, and you're talking about, protection of the ponds and all that, but the neighbors as well. How do we'll go through the ordinances after this one, I suppose. How do we, just from an administrative process, how are we keeping track? How do you, with these suggestions and the things we're talking about, ensure that our ordinances
So what I
comply and support?
What I often like to do is put together a list of planning priorities at the beginning of the year, but we can do that at any time. Specifically, when we finish the master plan, we can go through and list those planning priorities and kind of identify the things that we think are the top priorities in terms of zoning ordinance amendments that we want to undertake. And we can take, you can either undertake a whole zoning ordinance, which might take you another 2 or 3 years to do, or you could say, all right, we want to update our PUD standards, we want to update our stormwater protection standards, or what have you. And so we can kind of list those and prioritize them, and then we just go through and kind of check them off. We take them one or two at a time, and that would be my suggestion.
In keeping with that, and it's gotta be some huge priorities that are gonna pop out of this, for sure. And again, one of our responsibilities is for safety, health, and welfare. And in keeping with that, some of these suggested uses could open up people's minds. Oh, let's put up this wedding barn or this roadside stand, but it's on North Territorial, and there's no way the ditch is that close to the side of the road. There's no place for them to get off. Before you know it, we got people getting hurt or whatever. I mean, there's got to be some responsibilities and some reasonable things put into place that we have a responsibility to cover under the safety and health and welfare. I would assume that we've got to include or make sure they're built into the ordinances or whatever.
I don't think, Bruce, will you be able to put a roadside stand in the right-of-way, though. You have to be out of that right-of-way, so if you're 60 feet back on the center of the road, you'd be away from the ditches, and only the county's gonna allow you to put a roadside stand.
If you don't have a driveway wide enough to pull in, or you're 55 miles an hour, someone's slamming on the brakes to get into that, 10-foot wide driveway. It comes under some traffic.
It's lower than the speed of its
The flower shop, the right of way and all that stuff. We went through all that.
Mr. Horton, did you have a comment?
Yeah, we've gone over the roadside stands in prior years because we've got about 4 different farmers that's got them, and it could get nasty if all of them come in here. If you're gonna change that roadside stand at all. That part of the ordinance. You got Duke, and you've got his father, and you've got a fellow up on 8 Mile. And that's kind of cut and dry, plus the greenhouse over there too.
We're just here for discussion right now. We're just
And again,
seeing what we have.
Protecting people is part of our responsibility. It's not to eliminate roadside stands, but we need to make sure that we're making sure that people are somewhat protected from being injured or whatever.
So again, when we're finished with this process and adopt this plan, it will be my work as well as your work as planning commissioners to think about the things that kind of rise to the top as the highest priority. And then we'll go through and look at the ordinance and say, does the ordinance deal with this already? Does it deal with it appropriately based on the policies that we've adopted? And do we need to make any changes? And so we may find that some things are great. We've maybe added some new language here, but the things are already dealt with. We just kind of cleaned up our policy to make sure it's in line with what we are already doing. And then there are some things that we might see, oh, well, here's an issue that we need to tweak a little bit because it's not quite the way we think it should be, or, it's not working as best as it could. And we do that from time to time anyway. We've done that recently with ordinance updates. So.
Well, and I apologize for picking on roadside stands. I didn't mean to make specific of that. It could be the barn, it could be anything. It's just the idea that we go through here under the strategy section, and we look at, the strategies are to allow these or wherever, and then we go back to our ordinances to make sure that we've done our due diligence to make sure that our ordinances are in keeping with what we're supposed to be doing as well. And we have a lot of responsibilities on our plate.
Any other comments or questions on?
I have some questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
On page 6-5, and a lot of these things are just because I'm just not aware. Sorry if they're silly questions. It said, it is also anticipated that future growth in township agricultural activity will come primarily from an increase in number of smaller scale farming or greenhouse operations. Just where did that come from? How are we anticipating that? Is that your general planning knowledge of the agricultural world? It's just out of curiosity.
Because there aren't any large pieces of land for sale.
Yeah,
If you're gonna do it, you're gonna do it on a small piece of land.
So, I'm not seeing that specific language. What paragraph is that? I'm sorry.
It's not a-
It's the very,
It's not
the very
green,
last
it's-
sentence above agricultural tourism activities.
Okay. So, yeah, that's something that's in here. I don't know how long that's been here. I can, speak to it generally, though, that,
I guess if you speak to it, is it right?
yeah, so, because of
Correct.
large-scale commercial farming, it makes it more and more difficult, especially for communities like this, where our farmlands have been kind of chopped up, and
That
they're
makes sense, okay.
farther apart, and so farmers are either leasing land, or they're having to move their equipment from place to place. It's not like there are a lot of tracks that are being put back together right now. So if there is increased farming activity, it's going to come from people taking smaller pieces of land and doing some kind of niche farming or something.
Okay. And then on that same page, the third paragraph down where it says, a range of agritourism activities should be allowed in association with township farming operations, subject to established township ordinance standards and limitations designed to minimize potential noise and other impacts in the rural areas of the township. That just made me, I'm just wondering about I think what struck me on this is the presentation of it, of this section. And that to me is, is that the right wording? And I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but I'm questioning it. These should be allowed. Is somebody going to come up with, is that the appropriate verbiage? If somebody comes up with something, I don't know, really off the wall, then our ordinances, it falls back on our ordinances as far as the regulation.
You gotta keep reading, I think is the best way to say it. It should be allowed in association with and
Right.
subject to.
Right.
So, yeah,
Okay.
unless it's outside of that.
I just wanted to make sure, it just stuck out to me.
Yeah, no, I
as
see what
this
you're
should be
saying.
allowed,
But
but then it falls on that,
It's
okay.
all qualified.
And I am not the grammar police, that's today's job.
First page, very bottom, locally produced products,
Where are you? What page?
very bottom of the first page.
Okay.
Do we necessarily want to say food products? Not that, I guess I really kind of don't understand why it's there to begin with, but if we're gonna leave it there, why limit it to food? People are
You thinking
buying
of firewood?
flowers and,
Products.
and, yeah, just locally produced products.
Agricultural products or
Yeah,
something.
just products,
Yep.
you
Yeah.
know. A guy
Doesn't
can
sound
cut his
like my
trees down and
language, so
make
I can't
furniture
speak
for
to it,
all I
but
care.
I
That'd be
can
great.
read like.
Could be llama sweaters.
Could be llama sweaters. Could
Yak
be-
shawls.
Casey.
Could be, next page, the top, the 3 bullet points. Okay, new non-farm dwellings near active agricultural operations. Okay. First one, no, I think, let that ride. Increased potential for what, adverse or crowded road conditions and traffic conflicts. I guess I don't understand what the road conditions is. Please tell me why road conditions was put in there.
I cannot tell you, I don't
Okay.
put it in, and I'm not trying to make excuses, but like I said at
Yeah.
the beginning, I'm at a little bit of a loss,
No,
because some of
that's
these edits were
fine. I
already
mean, just a
done.
question mark over it.
And I'm happy to
Inhibit the
change
ability
them
of farmers to
anyway.
transport farm equipment to non-continu. I've never heard anybody say I couldn't pull out onto the road and get down there with my, combine and whatever.
Some of the stuff is so thick and wordy.
Yeah,
It's
I
almost
just-
like,
it's
we discussed it, whether do we,
Yeah,
the whole
I
thing.
think,
Scrap it? We
I
don't
think some
have
of these
time to
things, we just
scrap
have to look to say, do we want to scrap it, let alone, or just modify it to make it.
or maybe
And
next
then,
time.
and then
scrap
if
it.
you read through
Clarify it, make
the
it
third
clean.
one, once again, new non-farm dwellings near active agricultural operations.
House.
Increase costs for the farmer. New non-farm dwellings near active agricultural operations increase costs for the farmer. Dang those new non-farm dwellings near active agricultural operations. And then if you continue that one, including increased cost to rent land,
You have to
and
say-
then increased risk.
I've never seen a risk do something. A risk never does something. A risk has a potential of doing something. So a risk can't do something like increase cost to farmer. So I think we should just bail on that whole number, or that third bullet point. Just
Why
cross
does
that.
it say new non-farm dwellings? So you can't put houses in there? And that's what we're talking about, right?
Yes,
Well, I think they're just saying-
I think this paragraph, or this section is talking about the kind of conflicts between suburban residential uses and existing farm activities.
Maybe you can clean up that section.
I could look at the whole section if you'd like, yeah.
Cannot compete successfully.
Yeah, some of this, and Pam and I have discussed this, that it's very verbose, and
Yeah.
the difficulty in taking an existing chapter and trying to go through and wordsmith the thing is, sometimes
Well,
it's easier just to
I
hack
think,
the whole thing and try to make it a little more
I
succinct.
think if we just, I'm kind of just flipping back to that first page, and the A, B, and C, the goals, promote the retention, stability, encourage long-term agricultural use, and support a healthy rural economy. Just all those things go back to directly addressing those, or at least 51% relating to those. I think we're doing well.
Sometimes less is more.
Yep.
So instead of trying to do line edits tonight, unless there are other kind of like overall policy discussions that you'd like to have with each other and provide direction to me, again, I'd encourage you to kind of go through, and if you've got specific line edits that you want me to take a look at, send them my way.
I just have a couple questions, and ones, they'll be simple for you. I think that it was over a year ago, I think, I had sent you an email from Casey Kelly when she was on our board. She's one of our local, I don't know, micro farms, she's like the active there.
Yes.
And she was questioning how, or that we didn't have to, that the Salem Township shouldn't have to, or how we were gonna promote land ownership, or, actually, I'm looking at page 6-7 on the top. Underneath all the red lined out stuff, underneath it says, promote land ownership, encourage farmers to make long-term, promote and continuing development of equine-related whatever. And then it says, work with county and state agencies to adopt. Are we gonna actively do that? Or is this just more words to put in there? I mean, how do we do that? Oh, yeah.
So those would, really be.
And I know that's pre-Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way to do that, and this actually looks more like a strategy or initiative more than something that goes into the, well, this is the agricultural policies now, so. So this is a strategy, and so I guess the way that you would do that would be, that would be something that the board might undertake. It might be something that a board member or the board as a whole might, it's really lobbying essentially. I mean, this is something where you could try to go and talk to your representatives in these different agencies and explain the importance to your community. If that's not an activity that the township really feels like it's their role per se, then maybe that doesn't belong here.
Well, and then also, back to Linda's letter, she wanted to know,
As far as encouraging ownership, that does go along with those ideas of purchasing property rights or development rights. And those are part of the strategies that the land preservation group is working on.
Okay.
So that's really kind of the answer to some of the questions that Linda had, is the land preservation group is trying to work on those things. And having this target preservation map and the criteria that we've established is one way to move towards it.
So is that something that we as a planning commission say, okay, I mean, in our master plan, you know, in section, you know, 2- whatever, or 6- whatever, you know, we need to make sure we're working on this, and we assign somebody, I mean, is it like that, or is it just a general visionary, and if somebody says, hey, I think we need to take this on, then we take it on, but otherwise.
So some of the things that go into, you know, some of the strategies that end up in the master plan do go beyond the scope of what the planning commission's regular work might be. So you are charged with making this master plan. You're charged with kind of looking comprehensively at the township and thinking about what the different initiatives or strategies might be. However, some of these strategies may fall under the purview of a different group.
Okay, got it.
Which is why the township board is the one that ultimately adopts this. Absolutely.
Okay.
So we're 30,000 feet people,
Got it.
30,000 foot view of our township.
As far as the
It was
master
just getting
plan,
confusing.
comprehensive plan goes, but then there are things that you're tasking yourself with, like updating the zoning ordinance, et cetera, and you know, putting items into this that help you with your policy direction when a rezoning comes to you, when a site plan comes to you, those kind of things.
It just seems like we went from 30,000 feet down to about 10 feet in some of these things.
Yes.
So I didn't know if that was
And
how it was
strategy.
supposed to work, or because it's just
Suggested
so
strategy.
stinking wordy.
Yeah.
Well,
It's all
that too.
confusing.
It is how it's supposed to work, because you start
Yeah,
with, you
'cause
start with
it
goals,
goes to the board.
you talk about the background and the details, and then you provide the strategies, which drill down then into the specific initiatives
Got
that
it.
you might take to achieve those goals.
Okay, thank you.
The following policies are set forth. In agricultural policies, the following policies are set forth. Development standards, next one is rural economic development policies. So the following policies.
Where are you, Bart? Are you?
I'm on 6.6 going into 6.7, so that agricultural policies that we were just talking about. Read what introduces it. So we go to accomplish the agricultural goals as presented within this master plan. So to accomplish this, for the preservation of agricultural activities in Salem Township, the following policies are set forth. Development standards, promote agricultural land use, and rural economic development policies. And then those four, maybe more, for under rural economic development policies. So we're saying there's a policy for rural economic development policy to work in cooperation with area chambers of commerce, county economic development agencies, MSU extension offices, or other agencies with jurisdiction to identify existing businesses that support and sustain local agricultural, and to develop a retention program to support such businesses. And then the last one is what really caught my eye. Work with the township's representatives in Lansing to encourage the state of Michigan to treat agriculture as a target industry for economic and job development. To develop new agricultural markets, to encourage food processing businesses in the state, and to upgrade railroad and port facilities to increase the ability to handle farm products.
That's here?
Way beyond our
Those are lofty goals.
Way beyond our.
There's a
I have that one
policy within a
circled.
policy to do that.
I got
Why
this.
not?
And we're not talking about the port of Salem, we're talking about, I'm sure, someplace that we take that railroad spur to. So,
Will you some of the changes, because some of this looks like part of Casey Kelly's letter.
I think that we should, something for those four should say, township should strongly consider supporting state and other policies that would,
result in more export of farm products from Salem Township and adjoining areas or whatever, something like that.
So instead of work with township supports or something.
Yeah, I mean, just a general thing that says, listen, as these things come up, we look at it and say, hey, would it help Salem farmers? Would it help us to,
If they're not green
keep
or red,
longevity
these are
of our
carryovers
agriculture?
from your, yeah, if they're not green or red, these are carryovers from your existing.
yeah, I understand that.
So, yeah,
I
I'm
understand.
happy to remove or
You're the
rewrite
cleanup man,
things.
Paul.
Yep.
Yeah,
But
I,
it's-
when you look at that, it's like, there's what, 7 of us?
So we can look at these and change those instead of saying work with, we can just say the township supports this idea.
Yes. And that's kind of along the lines of that, and on page 6-7, C3, rural economic development policies. It says support the location and growth of additional businesses that provide agricultural support services, bulk feed, and then it lists a bunch of stuff. Are we supposed,
Mobile meat processing.
the mobile meat processing, that just, can we go more generic on that?
That was in her.
That's from Casey, that
Yes, it
is,
is.
that is.
Oh,
That's all, with that type of farming, that has become more predominant or more of a case than it was in the past.
Right, but do
And
we
and
have
to
to list
encourage
everything?
that,
Promote micro farming.
Right.
You need to support, get the state support services,
Right.
instead of having to,
right.
I guess, run that yank up to Lansing.
To show the township supports that type of micro farming.
I think an all-encompassing.
But wouldn't that be more a function of our zoning ordinances? Why do we have to?
Well, support
Well,
location
yeah.
and growth of it, support, we're back to
How do we
30,000
do it?
feet.
Yeah.
I.
How do you support the growth unless you have things in your zoning ordinances that?
So number 3, for instance, gives very kind of specific policy direction to changes that you might make in the zoning ordinance. So right now, there's nothing in the zoning ordinance that would permit a mobile meat processing facility. And if somebody was processing meat on a piece of land, then it didn't, the ordinance currently didn't allow for meat processing facilities, we might say, dear property owner, you're engaging in activity that's not permitted, you cease and desist, that kind of thing. So this would give us the ability then, it would give the policy backing to update the zoning ordinance.
Okay, so it should be like that, to create the zoning ordinance, not more generic, and then,
We can be more or less specific on any of these things. It depends on how more or less specific you want to be. If you see something like this and think, oh yes, this is great, this is a high priority initiative of the township, we want to make sure this is in here so that when we go to update the zoning ordinance, we have the policy backing to do that. If we look at this and say, well, this might actually cause problems, and when we go to update the zoning ordinance, we're gonna have residents come to us and put this in our face and say, your policies say that you wanna do this, you now should pass an ordinance that allows for it. So that's the balancing act between being.
I didn't know if we were getting too specific to tie ourselves into, and that was my concern.
That's what I'm suggesting, that's a very specific, these are very specific use recommendations.
But don't they also give credence for the township to take action for similar type activities, that they can point to these activities, this other activity is similar to this, therefore we're gonna approve it. If you don't have any kind of citing of an activity, then, they say, hey, we don't have any provision for it. But we have this provision, and this is similar to this provision, so therefore we can go ahead and approve this.
It would be stronger.
Because you can't include everything, but it's good to have
You're
examples.
talking about the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, right, in the zone, yeah.
Yes.
Should then
I'm
we
not pretty
present
confused.
those as examples and not as specific items then?
Such as.
This mobile meat processing, that to me brings me, I'm bringing my truck to your farm and I'm gonna slaughter a cow for you.
That's right.
That's right.
Is that any different than me bringing my truck to collect your milk from you? Is that different?
It's organic.
Is it a mobile-
FDA now.
You know, and we don't spell that out in any
Yeah,
paperwork. Why do we wanna spell it
vague,
out?
vague is gonna help more, guys. I really,
I think
you know,
historically,
more general is better here.
slaughtering is a little more intensive an activity than milking. One, the cow is involved, the other, the cow is committed.
Okay, I mean,
That's
I
making it
I
nice.
saw that, the first thing that came to my mind was the milk truck going to a farm collecting milk. This is, he's going to the farm to collect a cow, or a pig.
Collecting milk has multiple instances. Slaughtering has one instance, and that's it.
Okay, Bonnie.
Okay, now, you tell me your mobile meat processing. What about the farmer who has the animal that broke his leg and they have to shoot it right then? You can't pick up a 2-ton cow and bring it to a farm,
Yeah, you can.
well, not very easily.
I-
And you can't move a horse that has been down, or you can't move an animal that's huge. That's why these mobile meat things have to go to the farms.
So I think we're
We're
getting a
not
little
saying
too
get rid of it,
specific.
we're
Yeah.
saying just make it general, so it just protects pretty much everything, Bonnie. So that we don't list these things and then someone says, oh, wait a minute, that's not on your list, so that's not allowed. We're trying to make it more general so it is more powerful. Yeah,
You
so
use them,
it's,
as
you
it
know,
can be cited as
agricultural
examples.
support services would include
Period.
that, certainly. And
Yeah, I mean, we
to
could-
disprove it would be
Yeah.
Well, the
ridiculous to
reason
try.
I said that is because
Yeah.
it follows right after the veterinary.
Yeah, and you know, I'm leaning towards, under this whole rural economic development policies, it says something like Salem Township should support anything that would believe in keeping with township and the rest of the,
Yeah, so I think maybe a such as, or just a
Yeah.
period
should
after
be,
service.
you know, should be generally supported, or I don't know, but instead of all
Such
these.
as, that's what I was trying to say.
So I'll look through this entire strategy section here
Oh, thank you.
and just make sure that we're not committing ourselves to overcommitting to something, but allowing us enough kind of coverage to be able to
Sure.
take the initiatives we would like to.
So then we get on to, the section, or page 6-8, and, you know, some of the same stuff. In my notes, just, you're saying, it seems like a lot of government involvement, Salem government involvement, you know, it's a lot of, that's just how I perceived a lot of this, is that we're driving all this, I thought it would be driven by the farmers and all that, and we would, you know, support, be a more supportive role, not driving it.
Okay. Got it.
Okay, so you got section, you've got part 6.
Yep.
Good.
The county road commission to retain a system of low-speed, low-traffic roads. It's 55 miles an hour on a high crown, loose gravel, narrow road, low speed.
No,
So, I
that's-
tell you what,
that's
guys,
the speed limit.
that's, someone's gonna put that on my gravestone. Why?
Unfortunately, that falls on the
Michigan
county.
do that?
Like, if you run down some of the dirt roads and you think, okay, I'm out in the middle of nowhere, and you get nearly run over by somebody going 75 miles an hour on a gravel road and flying through the stop signs, and you're like, wow.
The roads aren't posted, so they can do that.
Well, if the
Right.
speed limit is 55, it's not posted.
Yeah,
So do we have any control over number one, really?
actually.
Because a lot of it's state.
Actually, literally Salem, I believe, could just basically pass a local ordinance that says any unpaved road in Salem Township has a speed limit of X above and beyond.
You can't.
No, you can't.
You can't,
No, you
it's a
can't.
state thing. You
Yeah,
can't.
it's,
They
Lyon
tried it in
Township.
Lyon Township and they made them take the
Lyon
second.
Township.
well,
They had
No, you can't do it.
You can't do it.
So the answer is no, we can't reduce the speed limit below what
Well,
the county
you
says.
So,
The other piece of that, though, I've seen communities who have created policies that say they don't want their roads paved for these reasons. They don't want them becoming cut-throughs or thoroughfares because the gravel roads tend to slow traffic down. I don't know that that's necessarily the case here in Salem.
No, it's not.
This time of year, they go slower.
Yeah.
in
One
certain
pothole at a
spots.
time. Boom,
Yeah, you
boom.
see the headlights going like this across the road.
Yeah, this,
No, South Line just put up road signs. They just put up a road sign.
what do you mean?
They just put up a road sign. They just went up, ting, 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 ting.
Yeah,
County
I know,
roads.
they did that years ago on Dixboro between 8 and 9, and the state made them take them down.
Yeah. You can
They
put
tried
them
to
up.
slow it down to 25.
They were,
The recourse you have now is you get, well, I'll tell you this much, then I'll say this. What Salem could also do is you declare go ahead with paperwork and have every dirt road within Salem Township declared a natural beauty road, because natural beauty roads default down.
now that's,
Salem
yeah,
can't do
that
that.
is
There's
requirements.
ways.
Requirements.
There's ways.
Salem can't do that.
What?
'Cause
Salem
they
can't
tried to- what's that
declare a
road?
natural
What's
beauty
that
road.
No, they petition to the
Brookville,
county.
Oh, they can
Brookville
petition,
Road, we
yeah.
just did, or they just did that, did they want to declare the residents?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yes, but there's criteria, and it's not quite as easy as what they thought it was gonna be,
No.
because the residents
Yeah.
wanted to do it.
The
So
homeowners
they're
are really
defining what natural
restricted
beauty is.
on a view. as what
Not the
Township
residents,
road.
but
Oh, I know.
the state or county or
Oh, I
whoever
know.
the heck
It's-
it was.
it's-
It didn't
it's a
work,
mess.
that's
Okay,
all I
sorry,
know.
tangent.
Okay,
All right, let's keep
so,
on.
okay. So should sentences like that be in there, if we can't do anything about it? You know,
Well, the township does meet with road commission
Mhm.
every year and kind of go over policies. So having some policies to provide direction to the township board members who had that meeting are appropriate. Is this the appropriate language?
So maybe once again, we're getting down to, we should be a supportive role in something like that we don't have direct control over.
I picked up on some of the conversations, like, one of the farms talking to Gary about making sure the trees are trimmed. The county's not necessarily keeping up with some of the things that, they can get their farm equipment down roads, like Cowell Road has some tree trimming. So maybe having something there saying that, again, we're gonna
Right,
lobby with the county
Right.
for the farmers is what we can do, is the best we can, all we can do, but
well, not
that's
just,
it.
yeah, not just, yeah, for the farmers, but also maybe in general.
So we also-
Because they're the ones.
But they have the two extra needs for the extra clearances and things like that for
Sure,
farm equipment,
sure.
and because they're wide loads and things like that. So if what we're saying in this section is we're supporting the farmer, and we're saying we're supporting him by also addressing his needs with the county and the road commission as well. That's how I read it. It may not be written that way, but that's how I read it.
We also have a transportation section that we haven't gotten into yet, so
Yeah.
maybe that could be our next conversation.
Okay. Any other questions, or, that was kind of a messy one. Any other comments? Mr. Horton, you good?
most of that ordinance was brought here by Pennington. It came from other townships, because he was a planner for about 5 or 6 townships. So it was actually, I don't know, because I've been here quite a while. He brought that with him. It's just like our first ordinance. It came from Northfield.
And then Ronnie will just tweak it,
Well,
he's on, and now Paul's gonna scrap it all out.
It's the natural evolution.
That's right, that's how things work.
In another 10 years, planning commission, we go, there's not enough detail.
5 years after.
One thing I would like to comment, when I came here, there were three packing houses. There was one right down by the dump, and there was the last house on Salem Road, it butchered, and you still got one that does the venison behind Geary. The one down by the dump was pretty big.
One at Stonegate's small. Okay. 7, old business items. None. Right. Reports of commissioners and correspondence. Board of Trustees.
The recommendation on the rezoning of Macedonian Lane was delayed because just paperwork needed to be finished up. So I think the plan is for it to go on to the next board meeting.
Oh.
Is that
Yes.
sound right? Okay. And the beautification project for the hamlet passed unanimously. What we were recommending,
Right.
you know,
Beautification.
for the hamlet, yeah, for a couple block area in the hamlet. With
Signs, sidewalks, lights, curbing.
Treescapes, curbing,
Mhm.
crosswalks.
Basics, yeah.
Raising the electrical lines.
Yeah, she's moving.
Yeah, moving them up.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Raising the electrical
CBA?
lines.
I'm gonna have a short meeting on the 14th of March for election of officers and set the dates for the year.
Oh,
And that's basically, there is no agenda, no items yet.
there hasn't been anything either.
No.
last time.
Stopping
No.
Okay.
And that's at 6 o'clock.
Land preservation and conservation,
I think we pretty well covered it
got
tonight,
that set. Chairperson, none?
unless you got something, Bruce.
Just that we're moving forward on a piece of property that the appraisal came in, which is close to it's corner of Brookville and Curtis. So we're working on a preservation piece right now, and hopefully being predominantly funded by Washington Parks and Rec, the Farm Preserve, and the third agency which is the land conservancy. So they're looking at grouping together to fund the purchase of the property. Our requirement as a township is to support it with allowing some parking, so people in our adjacent property that we own, so that people can actually enjoy once this is modified for trails and whatnot, so they can actually park there.
Bruce, is there a question? Do you know if the township has ever had a property donated to it that's unbuildable in this land preservation bank? Has there ever been any land?
I don't know, it's not,
So we're good land.
they'll take any, I'm sure they'll take anything, but there's strategies to that.
We've had land donated, but not for land preservation. We,
Right.
you know, the dump donated a parcel of
Right.
land, and
So.
we got some off of the expressway that the builder couldn't build on it, and it was donated.
There's some tax strategies to that, to basically relieving, I don't want to be paying taxes on property I can't build on. So there might be some tax strategies to that. I think everything would be looked at in the rating system, and also be looked at as, I don't know what the answer is on the tax side of it. If they say, look, you know, we don't want to not get the tax income from it, like same token, I think. In keeping with what we're going to do in land preservation open areas, if it's not buildable, it probably falls under the category of woodlands, wetlands, or something like that. So therefore, it's something we're interested in under the land preservation and under our master plan, section 12.
Size of property is important too. You know, the real little pieces,
You don't want my 2 acres.
Are one of you two gonna bring up this section to land preservation then? Or is that Paul?
I'll clean it up and I'll send it along to both of you, I guess, unless you want me to reach out.
Yeah, as well, but yeah, we need to get to see them.
yeah.
Okay.
So I guess the question is, which one of us is going to do that?
Doesn't matter.
Are you the official guy?
Yeah, I'm the
Okay.
liaison,
We'll
so I'll do it.
we'll let you do it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
Yeah, we can coordinate, I'll get the edits done based on tonight's
Okay.
conversation.
Okay.
Get it to you, I can even put a little language together about what we're asking the board to do with it.
Sure.
Okay. 10, approval of minutes, January 22nd, 2018.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of January 22nd, 2018 as submitted.
I've seconded it.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor of approving the minutes of January 22nd, 2018 as submitted, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Minutes are approved. Number 11, public comment. Mr. Horton.
I understand there's a parcel across the street from me, it's about 160 acres between Chubb and Salem, north of 5. Mr. Bonner passed away, and I heard that that piece of property is for sale.
How big is that? 120?
160.
We have it as a target on land preservation, and we've been trying to find out how to get a hold of the heirs to Mr. Bonner.
There's also a group of people who are looking to buy it too. And because it does perk.
I'm sure-
Zoning is, what's the zoning?
Agricultural, I think.
in this area too, but there's a substantial amount of wetland area
Yes.
there, and you've got Johnson cutting through there, so there's gonna be some building restrictions on that property. And there's a lot of wooded area, so again, not sure how much is actually buildable, even if it does perk. So they're gonna have to go through all this other stuff that is gonna.
You should get, those people got a lot of money, maybe they'll donate it.
Which ones now?
The Bonner.
Bonner family, that's what we're asking for,
Yeah.
is potentially there might be a tax strategy for them to donate it as opposed to, or to go through the process as opposed to selling it to a developer.
Yeah,
We are trying to reach out to them. If anybody knows how to get a hold of them, I would greatly appreciate that information.
He's been sued so many times in Brighton for houses
Yeah.
that are bad. He's got a lawyer, I can't remember his name.
I've done extensive, I have the lawyer's name from that lawsuit, but I'm not sure that's their lawyer for the estate. I'm not sure.
He protected him for years and years in Brighton, and maybe he probably knows who it is. There's not that many people involved.
I have one real estate agent who's going above and beyond trying to reach these Bonner estate folks for other properties, and he's aware of the fact that we're looking to reach him for that one as well. So, but anybody else, I've asked one other townsperson here who is farming one of his properties, another property of his, to see if he could get a hold of them. And I'm about ready to knock on the door of the house that sits on that property to see who they actually send the
There's
rent
one
check
right
to.
there.
Pardon me?
There's one on the corner.
Well, there's
Where they
one
pay
house
rent.
on the property, I was gonna knock on the door to see who they send the rent check to. I assume it's a rental house.
Yes, it is.
Okay, you guys can talk about this after the meeting.
Sorry.
No problem. No, good to know. 12, meeting adjourned at 9:04.
Wonderful.
And,